Okay, hello everybody. We're Gloria Andrada and Robert Clowes from the Lisbon Mind and Reasoning Group from Nova Institute of Philosophy. We would like to begin by thanking the organizers for organizing such a nice symposium. And today we're going to talk about varieties of transparency, exploring agency within AI technologies. So many of the AI systems that play an important role in regulating the lives of millions of human beings are opaque. And this engenders a series of ethical problems. This also explains a widespread call for transparency. But what is transparency? When it comes to human technology interactions, there are different conceptions of transparency in play. In this presentation, we offer a taxonomy of the different varieties of transparency, a taxonomy that helps us navigate different domains of human technology interactions, and in particular, human agency. We argue that transparency is a relational category connecting user and technology, and that it can be divided into two types, transparency in use and reflective transparency. Getting to know their differences and how they fit together is relevant for offering some new ways forward on the question of building more ethically adequate AI systems. The plan is the following. First, we're going to describe transparency in use. Then we're going to turn to reflective transparency. Then we're going to explore agency within AI systems. And we're going to end with some brief recommendations for ethically adequate AI systems. Okay, so transparency in use is the standard form of transparency that features in embodied and extended approaches to cognition. The idea is the following. Once mastery is achieved, artifacts are transparent to the skillful agent. That is, the agent's conscious thought and reflection is not needed for its proficient use. Another way of putting this is that transparency here evokes that the agent sees through the equipment. This goes from rudimentary hammers, the famous case of that Heidegger introduced, where a carpenter, a very skilled carpenter, uses a hammer and it's transparent for him while he's acting. But it has been applied to different devices, such as notebooks, internet technologies, and other AI technologies. On the other hand, the concept of transparency appears also in debates surrounding the processing of private data in AI technology. Generally, transparency is brought forth in connection with the collection, processing, and usage of data of AI systems, and their opacity entails that conscious thought cannot permeate this information. E.g., for example, they lack access. Users lack access. So, building from this, we introduce the concept of reflective transparency, which requires the agent being able of seeing into the equipment and the mechanisms of the device they are interacting with. For theoretical purposes, within AI systems, we can differentiate these three subtypes of ways of seeing into. Processing reflective transparency, which concerns precisely how the data is collected, processed, and used. Transformative reflective transparency, which concerns the neural and bodily transformation that the pervasive use and reliance on these technologies, the effects that they have on the user, and material reflective transparency, which concerns seeing into the materiality of the device, for instance, their carbon footprint or their ecological impact.
So we wanted to explore these with respect to agency, which is a central category for us. So an agent is a being with the capacity to act. An agency denotes the exercise or manifestation of this capacity. Simple agency, like just spoken of, can be contrasted with regulative agency, or strong agency, as it's sometimes called, which we define in terms of an agent's capacity for reflection, self-evaluation, self-regulation, and organization with respect to projects over time. So completing a project, like giving this talk, requires you to think of yourself as an agent and work on different aspects of it over time. This is this requires some kind of self-regulation. So this regulative agency includes our interaction and manipulation of tools. Tools can play a role in allowing us to express regulative agency. So we could also talk about this as being extended agency, agency involving tools, if you like. Agency has a strong relationship to the two types of transparency we've just discussed. Consider, this would be an example that would make this clear. Consider, for example, a wayfaring system such as Google Maps. So the system is designed to be transparent in use. That is, when you're driving your car or walking across an unfamiliar city, the system just tells you which way to go. It does this in a way that, if you like, disturbs your fluid coping with the situation as little as possible. You can just see what you need to do. And it actually can expand certain cognitive abilities or perceptual abilities, our abilities in this case to wayfind, to find our way through roads or an unfamiliar city. Sometimes we might need to know how an algorithm is performing. That is, why did it show us this particular route and not some other route? And indeed, we might need to tailor this, so that we can see a better sort of route next time, or that we can see the sorts of route that we care about, for instance, without toll roads or using some other attributes. So here you can see both the transparent in use side and the reflective side of transparency can be made available at different times for a good interface. But not all systems make available at least regulative agency in the same way. So take, for instance, Facebook and the newsfeed that you see with Facebook. At least originally, this was organized by something called the EdgeRank algorithm. The EdgeRank algorithm had a series of different terms which would determine what you saw: affinity, how close you were to someone, weight, how many times somebody clicked on that item, and time decay. The more recent it was, the more likely you were to see it. Now it's thought that there are maybe thousands, maybe more terms that determine what you see. The point here is that this is not open to reflective transparency. Many users of the Facebook system, perhaps most users, may not even realize that what they see is determined by these sort of algorithms. So while it may be quite transparent in use, at least at the interface level, Facebook is highly reflectively opaque. So to sum this up a little bit, interestingly, AI systems are often transparent in use and often designed to be so, but can be highly opaque with respect to reflective transparency. This is problematic. Perhaps we need to think of AI in terms of how it can augment human intelligence. Transparency is important here because, as we've seen, it relates to the structure of human agency. Sometimes we need to see how a certain algorithm works, or at least have some idea of what is being presented to us and what's going on behind the scenes. So to this end, using extended systems to constrain ourselves, like you might think of a Fitbit here or something like this, can have an algorithm which might actually allow us to practice agency or to interact better. But constraints are not themselves a problem. It is how you control and practice vigilance with respect to those constraints which can be very important.
Okay, so from what we've seen, we argue that regulative agency requires both types of transparency. Procedural transparency is about our fluid interactions or our coping with the world. And reflective transparency, especially where algorithmic resources are concerned, is about regulating the way our tools and indeed ourselves function. So our recommendation is that AI systems, the ones with which we pervasively interact, should afford both types of transparency, at least to some extent. While transparency in use is required for our cognitive economy, reflective transparency is crucial for some forms of individual and collective flourishing, in particular for our agency.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Point where questions can be asked. We'll see you in questions.